welcome everyone to HITRUST Secrets. And let me add in chat. And you're welcome to add, your LinkedIn profile or whatever I put in the LinkedIn profile for myself, for Donna, and for Jeff. We're kind of the founding members of the HITRUST user group. Try to get back here every week. So welcome if this is your first time here. By all means, you can stay off camera. We ask that, if somebody else is talking, that you mute yourself, but this is meant to be a discussion about any questions that you have about HITRUST, all of the different permutations, from the very basic, what assessment should I look at to I'm in the middle of an assessment, I'm almost at the finish line, and I need the last little bit of assistance. So whatever you have, whatever questions that you have, welcome. And, we just ask, it's a non-compete space. So we're all in different angles. Some people are HITRUST assessors, some people are what we call audit sherpas. Other people are coming from the company perspective as an assessed entity, whether that's a covered entity or a business associate. So we just try to keep it very neutral. We're not trying to get business or anything like that. We're just here to talk HITRUST, facts, figures, happiness, sadness, whatever it comes. So I will open it up if anybody has any questions that they want to kind of get to.
I mean, anybody mid-assessment or have burning questions or trying to figure out which HITRUST framework to go with?
No? All right. Well, I'm going to continue the saga of that interim assessment that I'm still doing. It's an interim assessment for an R2. And the change was this year, the client moved from a co-location, their infrastructure to a cloud environment. And so, it's not a showstopper, it's not a deal breaker. It's not like they can't do the interim assessment, but additional controls had to be added. So went through with HITRUST compliance, opened a ticket through support and said, here are the ones that myself and the validated assessor think should be added. HITRUST came back with a couple extras, and a couple of them that I had added, they were like, I don't know why you wanted those, but I was like, I was looking basically from the evidence, going anything that relied on evidence from the co-location, I wanted that to be now reviewed and used from the cloud environment. So got all that done. HITRUST compliance was very efficient in getting the extra controls added to the assessment. And now I can rely on a lot of external inheritance from the co-locate or from the cloud environment because they're HITRUST certified, so I can use theirs. So I'm in the process of submitting all of those to the cloud environment, but I came up with a question because the scope, the facilities, the third party, all is from the original assessment, and it still shows the co-location. And so I've submitted the tasks to, or the controls to the cloud environment. And I all of a sudden realized, I was like, well, how are they going to know that they're now the provider of this because the assessment doesn't have them listed at all? Talked with HITRUST support, and they said that the cloud provider should still accept the inheritance requests. So I'm not sure. So I'll report back. Like I said, I submitted those. I haven't heard back yet. So I'll report back whether that happened or whether I need to add comments, because apparently I can't change the scope or the facilities or anything like that in the scope of the interim assessment. But there will be a note. They did say that there will be a notation in the interim letter that talks about the fact that it has been moved from one location to another. So it won't show, the old location in the interim letter, but more to come on that. So as soon as I get through this whole thing successfully, I'll put together probably a 20-minute presentation and I'll take everybody soup to nuts. But I figured it's helpful sometimes to live it as we're going through it. So anybody has insights into having done this, any questions or any advice you can give me, by all means, I'm yours.
It's good to know that HITRUST allows these types of changes because I was kind of under the impression that they didn't when you were approaching an interim, because they tend to look at that and go, yeah, it needs a full assessment because you can't change the scope.
Mhm.
That's a core part
Right.
of the interim is that you can't change the scope. So I'm a little bit surprised that they're permitting it. It's interesting because then it would lead me to maybe consider in the future if a client is in a similar spot, pursuing an interim instead of a net new, if that's how the timing has hit,
Mhm.
in spite of significant changes. So that's it's interesting.
Well,
Um,
really, the only thing that changes the physical environment. The audit logging is the same. So it's really
Is,
just, it's going from this data center, which was not on-prem, to this other
mhm,
data center, which is not on-prem. So I think
yeah,
that's where, and if you look at the handbook, it talks about, here are certain specific
mhm.
instances, but you have to
Okay.
talk to HITRUST
Okay.
and yeah. So I mean, I wouldn't recommend, if a client could
Mhm.
wait until after the interim. But
Yes.
this happened probably, 6 months after the certification was done. This
Okay.
move happened. So, and it was at the end of a lease and things like that. But yeah,
Mhm.
to your point, that's a good question to talk through with somebody before you start your first one is, will
Sure.
you at least be in that location for a year so
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Jump in, Jeff.
I'm curious about a failover scenario though, right? That's a change of location. It
Hmm.
might be temporary, it might be permanent.
Yeah.
So during a failover, what happens? So I'm curious.
well, I
I
think
think.
that's usually an environment that's already there. So that's part of your maybe a part of your backup strategy or your disaster recovery strategy. So it's something that has been reviewed
Mhm.
before, whereas this
Yeah,
Yeah.
was
is
not on
net
their
new.
radar. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and a failover is documented, so that's included in
yeah,
the evidence that would have been provided before as as a documented failover scenario. So unless you're using a failover system which was unplanned,
hmm,
which was not part of your described failover protocols, then I would think, as Sue said, that it is already there, and so it is included, so to speak, even though it's not one of the main documented in scope locations, it has been established as an appropriate
yes,
location.
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah.
That helps. Thank you.
Yeah. And I would think that even if you were doing a tabletop, business continuity test, that failover location would have been included in that. So your assessor would have had um, some exposure to what you had for a failover. So if at that point in time that you're doing the interim assessment, you
Mhm.
happen to be in that failover system, I think that's like, well, it's that control's working as designed. Yeah.
Yes. And see, this goes back to, you mentioned you'd probably recommend somebody do, significant changes just after the interim. Completely agree. And I think that's one of the key recommendations from our discussion just here
Hmm.
is that anyone who is planning on significant changes, which will absolutely impact scope, whether it's new applications, new protocols for authentication, those types of things, any significant impact,
Hmm.
what I would recommend is submitting that interim as soon as you can. It can be submitted early. You don't have to wait until the 1 year mark after your assessment.
You do
And
have to
if you
wait I think 120 days if you have
have,
a subscription is
yep,
the earliest. So yeah,
yep,
you don't have to wait for
absolutely.
that 1 year mark, but you can't do it like 3 months after you get certified.
No, you
But
can't
yeah.
do it through. There are time parameters. So they release the framework or whatever the controls are. So you have to wait till HITRUST picks your controls, and then you can do that. But you can submit a month early, six
Yes.
weeks, 8 weeks early. You can absolutely submit early, and I would strongly recommend that for
Hmm.
anybody who's looking at significant changes. Get the interim, get it out of the way at the 10 or 11 month mark. Get your significant changes in right before you hit that, kind of 1 year and counting, from
Right.
your middle of your certification
Right.
standpoint. And then you will have as much documentation as you can around the new scope, which will just make life easier
Right.
going into the next assessment. So absolutely, if you can time your interim
Mhm.
to be as early in your interim window as possible. And if you're looking at usually it's 19 controls plus your caps.
Yes.
So if you kept your caps very, very low, you could be looking at 20, 25 controls total for your interim. And
Mhm.
anybody who's gone through the full R2 knows that 25 controls is like easy street.
Way better, yeah. Yeah, and that, to talk through like what Ryan Patrick had said, a lot of this will go away as the continuous assessment happens, so as that happens, because, I think they do realize that 2 years is a huge amount of time for for a system to never change, especially at an application level.
Mhm.
Usually your infrastructure lasts, unless like this one, I think was coming up off a lease or something like that. So, it
Yeah.
was have to get this out to, and it, it was a more cost-effective solution to go with this with the cloud environment and the cloud hosting. But yeah, I mean, hindsight would have had that conversation with them before and said, okay, are you planning any major changes? Like, oh yeah, in six
Sure.
months we're gonna, move. Can we contractually? I mean, and it could have been because I wasn't involved in the original, but it could have been a contractual, their customers telling them you have to get this in. And even though they know they're not going to renew with their co-location 6 months, 10 months later, but they're like, well, we're contractually obligated, coming up against that time. So, if it happens, it's doable. It's just not ideal. Definitely if you can arrange the schedule better, definitely arrange the schedule.
Sure. I think the continuous assessment is going to be not easy street on this. I think it will be a learning curve as far as what the best approach is for timing it. Because if they're going to pick randomly a series of controls every
Hmm.
quarter, that'll be trickier actually to figure out what the plan should be in terms of, do we do it now? Do we wait to see if the control is picked next quarter? What if it's not picked next quarter? Do we, and how much
Right.
evidence are they looking for? How far back are they going to go?
Right.
So I think that will be interesting. I don't know enough about HITRUST new continuous assessment strategy yet
Right.
to understand how, I mean, it will no doubt be a whole new world. We just don't know yet what shape it's going to take.
Right. Because is it going to be, I mean, I'm envisioning it's an interim assessment every quarter, which some people may go, oh, that's great. And others may go, no, I'd rather take the full brunt every 2 years and just kind of have the more traditional, especially in an R2. Like an E1,
Mhm.
it makes sense to do a continuous assessment because it's
Mhm.
probably averaging 10 to 15 controls out of the 44, or
Mhm.
45, as he was saying, would happen next year. But yeah, for an I1 or an R2, are you really going to have to do, a quarter of those or even 20% of those?
Mhm.
That's still a huge amount if you've got 400 controls. That's a
Mhm.
lot to do every quarter, especially to your point, not knowing what's going to be included. Is there going to
Right.
be
And
something from every domain? So am I going to have every policy and procedure every quarter uploaded, or is that going to kind of go and we're just going to look at implementation and
yeah. Yeah, and I wonder how the factors are going to, play into this. So
Mhm.
if somebody's looking at a high trust assessment and they want to pull in additional factors with other controls, how does that work? Is that
Well,
on
they
the
do have
quarterly?
they do have what they call that rapid reassessment, which if you've got an E1 or an I1 and you've got a combined assessment, you can do what they call a rapid recertification. And so I know that's picking some of the controls, but not everything. But I don't know exactly. And so I'm assuming they're going to kind of mirror this quarterly to that rapid
Okay.
recert.
I wasn't under the impression that all of the factors were available for like an E1. When I say factors, I'm talking about like additional frameworks that
And I
that
know
people
you can
can
do a
pull in.
combined
Okay.
assessment. I don't know if every type of
Okay.
if every compliance factor is available, but I know you can do
Okay.
like an E1 plus HIPAA.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, I was going more for things like state level data privacy and industry specific frameworks.
Right.
They've started to include financial frameworks or um, you know, I think by and large, most of them are state specific. Um, well, I say that, and then I think of a bunch of other ones that are
Yeah.
not state specific. So I can't, it'll be interesting to see how that plays in
Mhm.
because is it then, I've got clients who have 800, 900, 1,000 controls once you include the R2 plus all of their factors.
Right.
And does that mean that they're going to go, 300 and
Exactly.
some
Because even
controls every
10%,
every
right.
quarter? Because that's a
Even,
lot.
yeah, even 10% is 80,
That's a
90
lot.
controls a quarter, and that's huge. And then you
Yeah.
also have to look at for those state specific, do they have requirements that something has to be reviewed every year in order
Yeah.
to conform? So,
Sure.
what are you going to buy from having that if you're using state specific controls that have to be reviewed every annually anyway?
Right. And when they get into, within the context of some of the themes, some of the assessment themes. So there might be, 6 or 7 or 12 different controls that all rely on similar evidence. Maybe they're different data bits
Mhm.
on the same IT tickets or whatever. So if those all get picked during the same quarter, magic. If
Right.
they're parsed out and it's like 2 this quarter, 3 this quarter, 2 this quarter, then I've got to collect that evidence every quarter.
I know.
So it
Yes,
will.
I know.
I'm excited, but apprehensive about what the logistics look like.
Yeah, and I completely understand why E1 would be the first one they would look to then see how will this play out, and then
Mhm.
how will we scale it to an I1 or an R2, especially
Sure.
with other compliance factors
Yep.
included.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anybody else? Anybody have questions about that continuous assurance program? Because I know that was something that we talked about a couple weeks ago when Ryan Patrick was on, but I don't know if this is brand new to anybody that's joined the call today to just say, what are you guys even talking about? Is anybody
Mhm.
that kind of wants us to kind of talk through the basics of what Ryan gave us a couple weeks ago? Nope. Okay. All right, everybody gets the concept. And again, the to me, the advantage of it was not having to worry about timing your next assessment so that you're continuing your certification, but not losing a month of your certification so that, you're
Mhm.
submitting your next one early enough, but not too early. And this kind of removes that because if you're part of that program and you're going quarterly with a subset of controls, your certification stays perpetual. So it does not expire while you're part of that program. And again, then, of course, the next step would be, okay, well, what part of this can be automated? What part can be
Yes.
integrated into your systems? And that was the question that we asked about, well, what would validated assessors do? Because they're not going to want to be embedded month to month, quarter to quarter with all of their customers. So what can they do to have it be something that, can be an automated evidence collection, whether that's
Mhm.
still manually being gathered by the customer because, you don't want everybody in your audit logs, but so maybe you're manually collecting it, but you're sending it someplace. So there's that, but so
I
lots of
think it's
lots of
all,
logistics.
yeah, and some of the other challenges, such as the changes on HITRUST end to the controls. So they have released iterative changes, and they did go through several years when they were trying to get from version 9 to version 10, and then they skipped that entirely and
Right.
went to 11. But since then, they have released iterative changes. And I just wonder how those types of changes are also going to play in
Hmm.
to the continuous assurance because right now the onus is on the client, the assessed entity, to make sure you get those controls early enough there is no exception if you get up into the assessment and discover you didn't realize this new obligation was there. That responsibility is yours. You're supposed to have looked at it in advance. You're supposed to have implemented it in advance, and you're supposed to be ready with evidence.
Right.
And ITRUST doesn't.
Yeah. What is that
It's
field work
they look at that and
timeframe?
they're
Yeah.
like, well, that's on you. You're supposed to know. So
Right.
at this point, then when they come in with new controls or changes
Mhm.
to controls, what is the change time frame and
Right.
kind of cadence look like? Because
Exactly.
everybody needs to have advance notice, but if you don't know which controls you're going to get each quarter.
Well, and that kind of pulls into that whole field work because we've always got those requirements that a control has to be implemented for 90 days before you're looking at it. And your policies and procedures, if you're doing an R2, have to be documented at least 60 days before your field work assessment
Mhm.
period starts. So, yeah, you're kind of looking at that going, okay, well, how does that work if I'm looking every 90 days at these
Mhm.
controls? And, they've either added an extra element to an existing control that I wasn't aware of and I didn't have documented to that specificity in my procedure. Or I maybe I do, but I can't find it because, I'm not the one writing the procedure documents and somebody go, well, 3 months from now I'll find it and go, oh my gosh, there's that control, but I didn't know where it was. Um, and especially, the control implementation part of it as well.
Mhm.
Because, don't be fooled. An E1 says, oh, there's no policy and procedure requirements, but some of the controls will say you've implemented it as described in your policy or
And then
following
you
your
have to
written
show the
procedures.
policy.
Yeah, so you have to have the policy
It's
because you're like,
sneaky.
yeah, well, because I think it's like password management is one of them, where it's like as described in your policy.
Mhm.
So you've got a policy and then it's enforced, and I think one of them is, that it's documented in a policy and enforced through technical means. And you're like, okay, well, I need a policy for this. And then there's others, as described in your written procedures. Like you can't have an incident response plan without having a documented incident response program. So that's one of the things that it looks at and says, okay, well, you can't just go, yeah, I've got it. We've never had to implement it, but we have it. So there is a documentation piece associated with even with an E1. But anything else anybody wants to talk about? I know I had an interesting conversation last week with a group. They were talking the concept of, we have the concept of a vCISO or a fractional CISO and things like that. And I've always looked at that as more the operational security piece. Somebody who came up through configuring firewalls and does more of that whole patch management and things like that. And this concept was basically considering a virtual GRC professional. So somebody that, you may not need full time. You may not need somebody full time on your team, but you start looking at them as, okay, but I've got an audit coming up and I need somebody to take me through it. I was talking with a lady yesterday who recognizes the need because she's like, yeah, most of the people I hire are doing the operational stuff, but I need somebody that just does governance and policies and can do the audits. But to hire somebody, to find somebody that has that experience, she's kind of like, I need somebody to kind of take them through their first audit. And so I thought that was a very interesting concept to basically, augment your staff with somebody that has that experience in a
Mhm.
very temporary or occasional basis.
Yeah. But that's exactly why my clients hire me.
Oh, okay.
So
So you're seeing
that
that even though we
that
don't have
that that
necessarily a name for it.
that is 100% why my clients hire me, because they're either too small to have somebody like me on staff full time, and a lot of companies don't need somebody full time
Mhm.
to run through high trust assessments and set things up and make sure everybody's ready. That's an ebb and flow that goes with assessments in a lot of cases, unless it's a mega corporation that has an entire internal audit department, or the yes, there are absolutely companies that have internal staff who rotate around doing different types of audits and that's fine. I tend to work with smaller organizations that are just starting or they haven't done this before.
Hmm.
So some of the companies I've worked with, one of my clients has had CISOs quit in the last two high trust audits
In the
just
middle.
for
Yeah. And that's why
in
that's
the
why we're
middle
here. So people don't quit.
because they don't know what
Right.
they've done a SOC 2, maybe they've done an ISO 27001, and they think, right, I don't fault them specifically, because a lot of people would say, yes, well, if you've gone through cybersecurity assessments, then you've gone through them and you can just kind of muddle through and you know what you're doing. High trust is just an entirely different playing field.
Hmm.
And I've seen so many people, and my heart breaks, they get into it and they go, I have absolutely no idea. This is, I thought I was working with something that looked like this, and all of a sudden it's this big, and I'm behind. They don't understand how strict the deadlines are, because you can run a SOC 2 if you're, 2, 3 months late getting the data, then you get a bridge letter, or something
Right.
from your assessor that says, yes, we're in the process of doing this report. It is late. We acknowledge that. But the
You're
client
still
is
working
is
on it.
getting
Yeah,
information.
exactly.
High trust doesn't work like that.
Right.
You can pay to have a bridge assessment, but that's a whole other assessment.
Right. And
It
you were
is
saying that
not
you
so
have to
good. Don't
stop.
do it.
Yeah, you basically have to stop what you're doing and focus on a
Yes,
bridge assessment
yes,
to then get back to your original assessment, as opposed to just going, yeah, yeah, yeah,
yes,
we're working on it. Just send a letter, you know?
yes. And some of your original evidence at that point may be expired, so you have to
Right.
recollect it.
Start over. Yeah.
I don't recommend a high trust bridge unless you are up against it and it's absolutely the only answer. So, my heart just goes out to these CISOs, or assessment leaders who are
Right.
in the middle of this and discover this is totally different than anything they've seen before. And that's where I will get called in, often by the assessor, because there are lines they can't cross, and they
Right.
know their
Yeah.
client's
Because
in
they can,
trouble,
yeah,
but they
they
can't
can't advise.
cross.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct. They can't cross that line, and they don't know exactly how much of a mess it is. And sometimes they don't want to know. So
Right.
they call, and I come in and I go, right, okay, I break it down.
Hmm.
It's a little bites. And then, I understand who the players are and all of that. And it is literally just breaking it down into small pieces, and then kind of reining in the scare factor, because when you get teams who are just buried and they feel like there's no chance they'll ever be successful, they can't move it forward because they have no idea where to begin.
Right.
So part of a really important part of the assessment lead inside any organization, this is not the auditor, this is the internal client side assessed
Right.
entity, is knowing how to break the work down for your teams so you don't scare them. You know what they have to do first. You give them small bits of information, and you make sure all the leadership understand how much of their time you're going to need. And then tracking that velocity so that you can see, are we delivering on time to hit the deadline? And it's very straightforward. You need to hit so many assessment, so many evidence for so many controls each day. And if you're not hitting that, then that's where the red light, you go to amber, you go to red,
Hmm.
and then you can go back to green, if you're getting in a good place. But it's really important to recognize those, because you can't submit 600 evidence bites in one day.
Right.
Even if you're working on it, the assessors can't process it, the auditors can't process it, your assessment lead can't process that, because everything needs to be named and organized and all that stuff. The assessment lead can do that. The individual subject matter experts do not need to do that. So it's
Right.
kind of breaking down what that is and understanding how your auditors want to receive the information, but not everybody on your team needs to get into those details.
Right.
So I've probably gone off on a very far-reaching tangent with this, but that's absolutely why my clients call me, because they don't need somebody, or they can't afford somebody, they're too small, or they have a new team, and they just want somebody to help move them forward. And I can train and coach as
Right.
well. And I know that you do that as well. So in terms of saying, right, here's how you do it. My repeat clients call me because they don't want to do it.
Right. Yeah.
they,
Well,
they don't
Sure.
want to.
Audit Sherpa. Audit
Well,
Audit
Sherpa.
Sherpa.
and I know we talked about audit Sherpa and we've used that here in, in the context of this. I just don't think that translates out to the real world, to a CISO or to
Right.
a compliance team or something like that. So I thought it was
Yeah,
very
I
interesting
agree.
that the person framing it as a vGRC person. And I was like, okay, that's too many letters all at once because I'll get confused.
vGRC,
Yeah,
Yeah.
virtual governance, risk, and compliance.
right.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
And so I was like, well, it helps frame that because it
Hmm.
definitely is not a vCISO,
Right.
and then you don't get into that whole um the philosophical response of, well, if you didn't come up through network admin, then you're not really a CISO because you came from a compliance perspective.
Right.
So you
Hmm.
kind of get that compliance versus security out of the
Right.
way by calling it, okay, I'm a virtual GRC
Hmm.
consultant as opposed to,
Yeah.
and that was the first time I had heard that as a virtual or a fractional role. So I was like, okay, I think that frames it. And then yeah, once you get familiar with the person, you can be like, hey, just call me Sherpa.
Yeah. But I think that's right. I haven't heard the vGRC term
Right.
before. So that one's new for me, but that absolutely, speaks to a lot of what I've done, what I have done. And I think so that's where you and I cross over quite a
Right.
bit in terms of our areas of expertise, because that's where, I've worked with companies and sat on the governance committee and the security council and the health and safety committee and it kind of round tabling it because I was the common thread
Right.
that went round, and HITRUST actually spans all of those. So the visibility is really important, but also making sure that none of those HITRUST is used as a scapegoat so much, and it drives me crazy. So people go, "Oh, we were told we can't do this because of HITRUST," and I said, "Really?" And I like to know exactly what they were told they couldn't do,
Right.
because HITRUST is used. I've discovered by a lot of folks, and they're like, "Oh, we can't do that because of HITRUST." I'm like, let's break that down.
Yeah, see, and I always looked at it as a different, as completely differently. I can usually tell them like, look, I can't get you budget. I mean, I don't have a bank account to get you budget for a particular thing you want to do. But if it fits with adding a security control in, I can
Mhm.
certainly, give you a business case to say, hey, it's going to make your high trust
Sure.
certification successful or
Yeah.
easier if you do it, if you have this particular thing implemented. But I've never seen it as a blocker.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I always really kind of zone in anywhere where high trust is being used as an excuse for blocking, because it's an inappropriate use of high trust. Hi, Ryan, I see you there. It's an inappropriate use of high trust, and it doesn't help when
Right.
you're trying to implement strong, cybersecurity and controls, because people then see it as a bad thing. And the reality is that I'm constantly working on the risk side of things to go change it into your opportunity. If
Right.
this is a risk, a real risk, then you're not the only organization that's likely facing that.
That's
And
right.
how you solve it can be your competitive advantage. Whether it's how you embrace high trust or how you're dealing with, attrition within a specific sector can be a big thing. And so you want to figure out what those risks are, and then really go after them to convert them into competitive advantage.
Mm.
And where I'm overseeing teams, I regularly coach to say, try not to be a blocker on things. If somebody's coming up and we've run into something that is against a regulation, or is something where we can't do it this way because the technology doesn't allow, try and step back and think of ideas. What are opportunities for solutions
Hmm.
that meet our needs to manage the risk, or address the blocker, or navigate, whatever the troublesome spot is, but come with ideas that address all those needs and help move forward, because that's where you're really changing the conversation around to opportunities.
Yes. Amen.
It sounds simple, but so many people are like, oh, that's a risk. I don't think we should,
Yeah.
they just
Well,
flag it up and block.
right. And it's the ability to withstand some of that risk, to tolerate some of that risk, or change that risk or transfer that risk that could make the difference for the senior executives. You're
Sure.
100% right, Donna.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw another one in there, which is the risk of so AI. We talk about this regularly. Comes with a lot of risks. Where's your data going? Are you
Right.
using it the right way? Is it engaged? So the flip side of that is the risk of not engaging AI. In 2 years' time, your competitors who figured out how to correctly engage AI will be working at a speed that you can't even touch.
Hmm.
So the risk of not engaging AI and blocking your own progress is just as big, if not bigger, than figuring out how to manage the risk and move forward. I mean,
Opportunity lost.
anybody else come across this?
Oh, no.
Yeah, I
You're,
mean,
you're
I've
on.
even seen it in clinical technology, to have, radiographs that, you're instead of you looking at it or you having a radiologist on staff look at it, you can send it to a specialist and you can have a computer look at it first to see are there things that it's noticing that maybe the human eye isn't seeing, or, collecting all of the knowledge of all of those different specialists that could look at a potential anomaly and guide that specific radiologist to look at this, maybe if you're doing like an ultrasound or something like that, look a little more closely over here because something flagged that a computer was looking at and kind of doing that assist for you. So I always think of it, right now I think of AI as being, in the computer, kind of separated in the virtual world, but it really is coming into the more physical world, that because a lot of people will say, oh, well, you should be in the trades then because, people are still going to need plumbers but those plumbers are probably also going to have some sort of an AI robot assistant helping them with some of the more intricate pieces of, diving in
Oh,
and fixing things or clearing pipes or something like that. So yeah, I think every industry is going to be affected one way or the other.
100%.
But
Was there somebody else jumping in there?
I was going to jump in, even though I'm supposed to be a fly on the wall. There's actually a McKinsey survey that came out that said in 2024 that I don't quote me on the exact percentage, something like 87% or 78% of organizations globally have adopted AI some way, shape, or form. And what I've been telling people is if you think about how AI has been built native into tools that they're already
Mm,
consuming, that number is probably a lot higher.
Right.
exactly. Yeah, they're not even aware of it.
Right.
right.
And IBM just released a report that said that 97% of AI breaches that have occurred were due to a lack of access controls.
Well, I mean, that makes sense because my son and I were talking about this the other day, and even within an organization, there's hierarchy of who knows what. So your manager may know more about something than you do. So I was talking with him about that. And I said, well, you're using your company-owned AI large language model, but you may get a completely different answer than your boss because your boss is privy to more information,
Right.
and you're not
So
supposed to know that.
right. And just as an example, very basic example, somebody preparing the shareholders quarterly report, and they want to impress, switch up the language a little bit more, make it more polished. So they take it and run it in through their internal
Hmm.
chat GPT. Hopefully it's not the external.
Yeah,
But so they run it through an internal, what they think is, confidential. It's only used in-house. Fine. But there's a whole bunch of people in the company that aren't supposed to have that information yet. That
exactly.
is confidential information until it is shared with the shareholders. And
Exactly.
there is a named list. There's a named list of people with access to it. And so what they've done, and like I said, if they've gone to an external chat GPT, that's a whole different
Right. But
ball
even
of wax.
internal, because a company will think, oh, well, we're
Even an
safe because
internal
we're
will know.
internal. But
Right.
again, there are certain people that know certain information that nobody else, that other people shouldn't know. And how is that model going to
Exactly.
know that? How is that model going to go, oh, this is proprietary to only this person and five other individuals, but they've put it in here and now I've used that information. So when somebody from a completely different department goes and makes a query, does the language model say, oh, well, hey, here's some new information that you weren't even privy to? Oh, you weren't privy to it because you weren't supposed to be. And that was the conversation I was having with my son. I'm like, how do you protect that? You know,
Well,
how do you?
oh, sorry, Ryan, you jump in. Yeah.
yeah, the model already exists. If you look at the data classification system that the federal government has put in place, you think about unclassified information, confidential information, secret information, top secret information, and then top secret is all compartmentalized. It's all about data tagging and data
Hmm.
classification. The problem is that people are just building these really cool tools
Hmm.
and not thinking about security.
Hmm.
And that's exactly what we're seeing. And it's only going to get worse because in my day-to-day conversations, don't get a strong sense that people really care about AI security. They just want the cool
They
tool.
right. They don't understand. So what we haven't even got to yet, this is just honest mistake side of things. Now, when we go then the next step into social engineering, so I'm chatting with so and so's assistant who I know has to prepare the shareholder report, and I suggest, oh, you know what? I've used Chat GPT. It's really good. The internal one is login
It's real
protected,
secure. Yeah.
so it's fine. And I then have a conversation suggesting that it be run through Chat GPT. And then, I don't take a look at the report. She doesn't show it to me, and, whatever, that's fine. And then she tells me later, she's like, oh, it was great. Thanks so much for that suggestion. Right. Then I go into Chat GPT. I know that she's done this and say, right, give me the figures from the last 5 years and whatever. So I've
Latest
then,
quarter results.
right, I've
New announcements.
specifically
Yeah.
aided her a bit, but not in a way. Can anybody prove that? Can anybody? So this is how the social engineering side of that works, is that, these are, and I use social engineering because it is very much about how you kind of orchestrate those types of actions and reactions and the outcome and the access to the data. But these are the types of things that so many companies are not thinking of. And I have 99.9% of the people I've worked with are wonderful people. All right. However, everyone we work with also has a point where if they're backed into a corner, they would do things that none of us would think they would do, and we wouldn't do. We all have our own points where if we were backed into a corner, everybody has the Achilles heel. And that's why we have to make sure that we're buttoned up so that it's not a gray area. It's
Right.
not that opportunity there. So then it takes it off as an option. And we don't, it's just one less thing to worry about. Humans are never going to be error free or trouble free. You're always going to get a few troublemakers in there. But the reality is, if you remove a lot of those options, then it simply takes them off the table.
Right. But how do you have the model recognize that something that they're looking at is confidential, and exclusive to a certain group,
Mhm.
you know?
So that's where you could set up a specific. So when Ryan was talking about the top secret is then compartmentalized, because it's not just you get access to everything top secret. It's you get access to things that you have business having access to in that compartment related to whatever that project or topic is.
Right.
So in this, for example, on shareholder reports, I would carve out something entirely separate in the company's internal login access only with those named parties only, that specifically is for that type of work. Any shareholder related work goes into just that compartment. And it's fine. But what companies need to do is, first of all, have the conversation, and understand that they do need to compartmentalize some of
Right.
this. They need to understand that it shouldn't just be login based, because there's probably a lot of things that they're going to miss out on from an AI perspective. So if you have a law firm, for example, and you've got the head lawyers, the seasoned lawyers who are writing up reports on different things, you don't want their things to automatically be restricted, because they're senior and they might be handling some, super confidential cases or super confidential information, because then their reports aren't flowing down to information that the other attorneys and the paralegals can all access. So I'm using that because a law firm structure is a kind of very clear hierarchy when it comes to those things. But their AI tools rely on that seasoned, level of leadership putting in the information, and then the rest of their teams getting the benefit of it. That'll go into a lot of different organizations, but that's why compartmentalizing based on project or the type of work is probably, in my 2 cents, more important than restricting based on login. Because if you start restricting based on login, you're actually going to accidentally interrupt the benefit of the AI you're trying to get.
Well, I think the first step is classifying your data. Because I know when I would go through with an organization and just look at, where is the data, and amazed that 11% of the data that we had stored on our shared drives were externally, people had external access to them. And it wasn't time boxed, it was forever. And maybe they needed that, but maybe they didn't. And so, first order of business, and you're never the popular person going in and going, hey, let's classify all of our data and let's look at restricting this external. And it's like, well, I needed this, and it might have just been a marketing thing for, some press release. But at the same time, you're like, okay, but maybe we don't need to have that person have access to it anymore. Maybe we can now shut that down. And it's a painstaking process to start that. But I think that's the first step to then being able to add this model to it, and not to just go, well, let's just add a model. I mean, I think we as security and compliance professionals understand, look, there's something we need to confine and put guidelines around AI, but I don't think any of us are at that point to really understand all of the implications and be able to make those policy corrections and say, okay, here's this whole new really quick virtual assistant coming in. It's like your super employee that's going to organize everything, and you're like, okay, but there's certain things that you can and can't have access to, and kind of start there, at first. But I mean, I think we're on the path. I think we're just lagging behind a lot of where we need to be before it gets fully unleashed in a year or two.
To keep it close to home, this is especially important in a healthcare context, right? Because HIPAA specifically tells you that you can't share patient information unless you're providing treatment, paying for treatment, and other types of operations, right? The problem is that it's the model developers and the implementers who really own this responsibility. They're the ones training and developing the models. It's less about the end user. Granted, the end user, there should be controls at the end user level with the consumer of the AI, but it's really on the model developers to make sure that the functionality to classify data, right, is in place. And
right.
I think
and required.
Right? And I would assume, I wasn't there and I didn't do any kind of software development during this time, but when EMRs came out, like there had to be access controls put into place to ensure that just because you're a nurse in the ED doesn't mean you should be able to see patient records from radiology. They probably had to learn that the hard way. And we should be taking those lessons. And this applies, in my opinion, I'm on my soapbox now, but this applies to all facets of AI and AI adoption and AI security. Is we've learned all these lessons. We've learned that security needs to be by design, needs to be built up front in the design phase of whatever you're building. And we learned that through software development 25, 30 years ago. But yet here we are. Like we're not learning from the lessons of our past. And I don't want to say it's driving me crazy. I'm just dumbfounded by it. Okay, I'm off my soapbox.
That's okay.
History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
That's a good way of putting it. Yep.
All right, we got 10 minutes left of our HITRUST Secrets episode today. Anybody have anything else they want to talk through? Questions about assessments, population sizes, going through picking population samples. I found a really cool feature in Excel. It's probably been there forever, but there's a whole data analysis piece of Excel that will actually pick samples for you. The only hard thing is you have to have a column that has, I use a sequential number in the column, but then you just say, okay, there's 65 pieces here and I need 5 of them, and it'll randomly select for you. So
Mhm.
I remember I used to have a custom random sample generation, but now it's built into Excel. So easy to justify to my
Excellent.
HITRUST validated assessor how I picked my sample.
Did you take a video? Did you take the
Yeah,
snippet video?
exactly. Yeah,
I,
well, and it was
I,
funny because I did talk to a client about that, and I said, okay, not only do you need to send me like the list of your employees, but you also need to send me screenshots of how you got that list. And they're like, what?
Mhm.
And I was like,
Yeah.
this isn't new.
Right. No, and I want to highlight actually that Snippet, which, isn't a brand that we necessarily talk about a lot, but I'm sure it is used ad nauseum through all of the high trust assessments. One of the things they've come out with, I think it's about a year ago, maybe, is the opportunity to snip a video. So that's one
Oh,
of those things that you can put it on delay. You can just go to video, and you can have voice or not voiceover. But it's I use it as just basic functionality. I don't tend to make it complicated because it's a great tool, but it's really amazing. It's amazing for IT tickets when I'm trying to show somebody, here's just this thing that didn't work, and I don't want to have to do a screen share and align our calendars and all this because it's a 2-second thing. I can just show you.
right. I clicked
Um,
this and this happened.
yes, but it can also be used for things like how did you get that file? Or how did you approach something when you were collecting evidence? Because it's you can just take that 30-second or 2-minute video and save it just like all your other screen captures, and off it goes. So I throw that out there in case anybody's looking for the quick and easy button on how to capture evidence for how you got other evidence.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, because I was like, always had to do this. I mean, I think maybe in 2016, 2017, I didn't have to do that. I could just, here's the list of employees. But I think since 2018, 2019, there's been a requirement. And I was like, well, maybe it's just my auditors that were like, no, we do this on SOC 2s. We're going to do this here. But I was taken aback that this one client was like, I've never had to do this before. I'm like, well, it's me now. So you do.
Yeah, I've seen it
And,
inconsistently applied.
you know, and you need to set your cell phone up on a tripod and film yourself,
Doing the work. Yeah.
actually doing that process, right? And then somebody behind the phone filming the phone doing its
Exactly.
work,
To make sure. Right.
right?
Well, I always thought that because there was one that was something about the password was obscured when you're entering it. And I'm like, okay, so you just want to see the dots on the screen? Eh, okay. And so
Yeah,
yeah, there were those fun ones, but
but those are great and easily solved with a snippet video.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because you don't want to put it out on like Loom or something. Here are the keys to my, here's how we get to our HR records. Yeah.
Yeah. And even things like have they changed the first password? So, that's a stumbling block for a lot of companies because they get that, they buy whatever the new tool, the new fancy tool is, and then how do they prove that they changed the password? And that was a main sticking point that they did not have evidence on. And I don't specifically save that evidence. So, if you get new tools and it's just part of the process and it's one of your checkpoints, then great, you've got your evidence.
I think McDonald's can use some of that advice right now with the release of all the resumes. If you guys saw that through their chat bot.
Oh,
So yeah.
Oh,
So I think their password was PW 1234556.
Yeah.
something like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
It
who
was.
is still using that?
Yeah.
Who's
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
using
So
that?
anyway,
But
No.
it came out of the box that way. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, that you have to change the first password. And every single time one of your inside knowledge folks, your administrators, leaves and knows the passwords to things, you need to change the passwords. Ryan, plug your ears. You don't want to hear this.
Yeah.
But these are things that we talk about and we might even laugh about because they're so simple. But when you get folks who just aren't, they don't understand the importance of it. And this is where security has to go beyond the information security or the cybersecurity or the GRC teams. It has to be something that everybody is involved in. It can't come down to just one team, but a lot of people don't understand how to get involved. I've encouraged companies to set up, just have people report if they're concerned about
Mhm.
something that they're not sure if it's a breach. It's not their responsibility
Right. To know whether
to
or not. Yeah.
decide if
Right.
it's a breach. But if they raise it because the InfoSec team or the cybersecurity team doesn't have visibility for, it's sitting in every single one of the hundreds of employee seats. So you've got to encourage people and give them a path for how
Right.
to report something and not slam them. I've also seen this done every single time they report. Why would you do that? Okay, stop. That's
Exactly.
not the way to get people to report things.
Exactly.
Oh
Well,
dear.
and it's funny because that was actually my light bulb moment when I kind of realized, because you're kind of in that ivory tower of, oh, we're security people. And, somebody they had a new employee that had started, and they had started on Monday, and this was a Wednesday, and they emailed in to the security people and said, hey, they just don't have their computer. Is it okay if I email them some work to their Gmail account? And my first reaction was like, oh my, how could you even? And I'm like, oh, thank you for asking that. No, let me go expedite their laptop. Because, thank you for trying to solve the problem, but that's not the way we're going to solve this problem. We're going to get on the IT people to get you a laptop by the end of the day today, if at all possible, and they're like, oh, okay, great. So, again, that was kind of light bulb for me. So just to wrap up, next week we're going to have Bill Deller from Schneider Downs, who's going to be coming in and talking
Excellent.
to us about ways to prep for your HITRUST certification. So we're excited to welcome Bill next week to this. But everybody's welcome. Bring your questions. Bring your triumphs, your victories,
Bring your
as well as
friends.
bring your
That's
friends,
right.
but also, bring your horror stories too, because we've all seen some of it, and we can commiserate.
Yeah, and the more we can share, maybe the more we can prevent.
Exactly. But
Okay.
all right. Well, thanks everybody, and we will
Thanks,
catch you next
everybody.
week.
Have a go.
Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.
Hey, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. If you got value from this episode, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next HITRUST Secrets. We go live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central and dig into real-world compliance and security topics. And each session gets uploaded right here after the live show. So whether you're catching us live or on your own time, make sure you're subscribed. We'd love to have you along on your HITRUST journey.